Mitesh here is the creator of Forever Clojure and is going to be talking to us about some of the hurdles faced in adopting Clojure. So without further ado, take it away.
Yikes, this is controversial. All right, so I'm Mitesh. I'm also known by Auxil.org on the online Clojure space. I work for Gaiwan. I've done Clojure for the last four and a half years, and Clojure script. I've contributed to a lot of open source repositories, and I'm heart of Clojure. Woo! Sorry, I have a habit of doing this. So why do we want to talk about Clojure adoption and the Clojure ecosystem? This topic kind of comes up every single time 2 Clojure or 5 Clojure programmers meet, and I want to add some novel ideas to this conversation. The first reason is because I'm selfish. I want a great career. I want to solve interesting problems, and I want to do it while using my favorite programming language, which happens to be Clojure. And I also think it's because a lot of us have internalized a lot of biases towards Clojure and its ecosystem. And maybe it's time we kind of rethink this from a fresh perspective, right? Like maybe there's a different way of thinking about everything. And there's this quote by Daniel Kahneman, which I really like from his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, that when faced with a difficult question, we often end up answering an easier one instead. And we fail to notice this substitution. And I think this is what happens with Clojure, is that when we are asking these big questions like, is Clojure dying, or is any programming language growing or declining, we often end up answering it with an answer to some different question, right? And I'm not going to give the answers. I don't think I have the answers, but I'm going to ask more questions which are actually relevant. Before we start talking about the Clojure ecosystem, I want to share a story about a town. This town was founded years ago by a bunch of people who wanted to live their life differently. They had a certain philosophy of life, and this did not match with their existing. They did not match in the existing way they were living. So they decided to kind of buy a plot of land, start building it up, and they started living in a remote place. And this was just a handful of people, right? And they found their purpose, they found their meaning, and they created these small patterns of living life. And slowly, word kind of started to spread in the neighboring towns. And once the word spread, a lot of people got interested. Who are these people who've kind of figured out life? They figured out the way of life. And everybody who was curious, they kind of wanted to go and visit them. They even wanted to shift to this town. The problem was that this town was extremely difficult to reach. There were no paved roads, there was no direction, it was across a valley. Like how do you even reach there, right? And the problem was there was no real incentive to go there. Like there was no treasure, or there were no tales of treasures. So most people did not go. But there were a bunch of few bold people who kind of figured out, hey, let's figure out the way, let's put the directions in, let's cross the valley and get to this town. And then they did, right? And it was a hard choice. They kind of had to give up a lot of things behind to get to this town. But then they did find their philosophy of life, and they did learn a lot out of this. They built paved roads for other people, and it was a good, happy town. Years passed by, and now the town kind of grew, and now economics kind of started to play in, right? Like now there were thousands of people instead of like tens or 20s of people. What started happening is that a lot of people started to kind of leave this town. And everybody had kind of their own reasons. Some people kind of grew, they wanted higher education. Some people wanted to do business. Some people wanted to be billionaires. Like everybody has their own reasons for moving from one town to another. And this is the same for us, right? When we are moving from one city to another, it's very hard for us to kind of find this place which we call home. And we're kind of always figuring out like what really is my home. Yeah, and like I said, right, again, this is an important point to keep in mind. There was no incentive for people to kind of stay here except for the philosophy of life. Now, there's this quote by Christopher Alexander, who has written an amazing book. I'm going to share the links later. Every place is given its character by certain pattern of events that keep on happening there. And this is what was happening with this particular town. When it started, it was built by these patterns of the original few founding members. And slowly, as the town grew, this pattern kind of started growing. Like everybody kind of came in with their own patterns, and it kind of became like a combination, like a structural combination of patterns, which gave this entire town its kind of defining characteristic, right? Like we go to Berlin, we go to Mumbai, like every town has this defining characteristic, which we kind of feel. We probably can't exactly tell you what it is, but that is how this town kind of built up its patterns. And similarly, I would like to hypothesize that every programming language is a place of its own. It may be a city, it may be a town, it may be a village. I've got this nice photo here which says Java is like the biggest kingdom here. So you might be staying in the Clojure village, or you might be staying in the Java kingdom, or you might be traveling up and down. But every language, every place has kind of its own set of characteristics of why people stay there. And these patterns kind of create a language of a place, and every programmer and every business needs to kind of figure out, do these patterns make sense for them? Is this pattern something I can call home? And that is why they migrate from one town to another, right? Like I chose to kind of migrate from the Python town to the Clojure town, and that's because it kind of felt right with my patterns. So now coming back to Clojure, I think Clojure has done pretty well. If you think about it, Clojure is a pretty arcane language. It's a Lisp, it's a functional language. It has no major backing. It started off as a passion project for like one person. And yet here we are, right? We are 300 odd people here having this conference. We have actual businesses. It's paying my job. It's a real practical thing. So I want to reiterate this, that Clojure has done really well. And talking about what Clojure has done well, there's another quote by Christopher Alexander where he says that we begin with that part of the language which defines a town or a community. These patterns can never be designed or built in one fell swoop, but patient piecemeal growth designed in such a way that every individual act is helping create or generate these larger global patterns, which slowly over the years make a community that has these global patterns in it. And I feel Clojure is one of those towns which has gotten one of the best set of patterns. We've kind of combined all of them, and now we have this vibrant community with a lot of good patterns in them. And this is the vibe of Clojure, right? This is why a lot of us love Clojure. This is why we want to work with Clojure. We want to promote Clojure. Like even if you're not getting paid, right? Why are we doing it so hard? And I think the vibe of Clojure is a lot to do with the community, right? And this community is more than just its people. It's about the ideas. It's about these patterns which we formed over the years. And I think it's also one of the part where we need to work the most, because although the patterns have been formed, I think there are some serious problems which we need to acknowledge, which I'll be talking later. And yeah, we love the language, right? I want us to celebrate this like every single day about how passionate the Clojure community is. But there's always this question, right? Should we have done more? Could Clojure be like 10x bigger than what it is right now? Can I have 20,000 job listings when I search for Clojure? And I don't think it's possible, but it's also, we also need to remember that Clojure has grown organically, right? There has been no systematic growth plan for Clojure. It's not a product of like growth hacking or something. And we need to be realistic, right? We can't grow orders of magnitudes. We can never be a Java or a Python very quickly. It's the same as asking this question, right? So here we are in this town, Leuven, which is like 100,000 people, and Brussels is like 1 million people in population. Do you think the people who are living here are always longing to be a town like Brussels? Similarly, I don't think we should be kind of longing to be a town like Python or a town like Java, right? We need to kind of embrace our own patterns and kind of figure out how do we actually stay true to our nature. And this is where I want to talk about that pessimism is a very dangerous thing. And I'm sorry, but I've seen a lot of pessimism in this conference itself that about Clojure. Right? I don't want to reiterate all of them here, but I think the more we kind of reiterate on these pessimistic thoughts, the more it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a feedback loop where it kind of ends up happening true in the long term. So I want to start by talking about, like, I want to explore this problem a little bit more. So I want to start by asking this question, like, who does Clojure attract? What kind of people are we attracting? Because this defines what our community is, right? The kind of people we attract, that defines our community as a whole. So is it existing Lisp users? Are we mostly Lisp users? I don't know, most of us. Are we existing Emacs users? I am. Are we existing functional language users? Sure. Are we obsessed with programming languages? Some of us. Are we old school Java folks? Yeah, I think a lot of folks have broken their tooth with Java and now they kind of want to chill out a bit, so they're using Clojure. And most of us are experienced people, right? Most of us are experienced. So is this a monoculture? This is what I want to ask, right? Are we mostly seeing similar kind of people around us? Are we seeing people who talk like us, act like us, dress like us, think like us? Or are we seeing people who are different than us? This is my question. And this begs another question, right? Who are the people that we are not attracting? If we are a monoculture, if the community and the patterns have already formed around this kind of culture, what kind of people are we not attracting? I think we're not attracting a lot of different type of people. So on the top of my head, I could think of new generation of programmers. They're not coming into Clojure because of a lot of reasons. We are not attracting programmers who learn differently, who learn through videos, who learn through visual elements. We're not attracting programmers who ask a lot of questions because they get shut down. So we need to be kind of mindful about these people to kind of break out of this monoculture kind of a situation. And because our community has formed in the way it has, there's this bubble which has kind of formed around us, right? And this bubble is not only in terms of people, but it's also in terms of ideas. So the perception of Clojure from inside the community is extremely positive. It's amazing. All of us love Clojure. Like, we think it's magic. It's the best thing ever. But is that the same of perception from the outside? Do people who are not using Clojure, who've never used Clojure, do they even understand 5% of the excitement or the things which we believe in? Like, why has this excitement, why has this practicality not been able to move outside? And that's a question we should ask ourselves, because this bubble, there's a thick layer of this bubble which is not allowing these questions, this excitement to kind of move outside. And there's also the way we perceive other programmers, right? If we because of the way most of us are, we kind of end up rejecting a lot of ideas, right? We have these biases in our mind about JavaScript programmers. We have these biases in our head about XYZ programmers, which is not true, right? Nobody's philosophy of life is same, right? We should be accepting of other people's way of life. And until we start doing this, the bubble will always be there. Everybody who's outside of the bubble will be fearful of coming inside. And there is the economics of language, right? Except apart from the community and the ideas, there's this big question about where are the Clojure jobs? And the economics of a language have to make sense. But if I ask you this question, when Clojure started, there were no Clojure jobs. And here we are, so many with Clojure jobs. So I don't think economies, jobs are the only part of the answer. It's one part of the question which we need to answer, but it's not the only one. And yes, this is a chicken and egg problem. Like, if we don't have Clojure devs, we won't have jobs. If we don't have jobs, we won't have Clojure devs. But there's a small solution to that. Okay, so now we have the bubble. Now, how do we break this? How do we let people from outside of this bubble kind of come inside, right? So the first is fear of a steep learning curve with Clojure. Like I was talking about my town, right? If there's a valley, if there's no road, there's no directions, a lot of people are going to give up because they need a very strong incentive to kind of cross the valley. Then there is a fear of finding jobs. This is the incentive I'm talking about, right? If there's an incentive, some people might still cross the valley, but without the incentive, they won't do it. Then there's the fear of career growth, which is again for everybody who's inside of this bubble. We know that Clojure makes us better programmers, right? It makes us better developers. But everybody outside of the bubble doesn't know that. So for them, the career might kind of halt if Clojure doesn't work out for them. But for us, we can move on to other things, and yet our career is going to grow. We know this, but not everybody outside of the bubble know that. And similarly, there's a fear of rejection. Actually, this needed to be its own slide, this line, fear of rejection, because I have faced this myself in the Clojure community. So there's this particular way of doing things in Clojure. Like, it's the Clojure way of doing things. Like, you go online, you go on Reddit, Clojurians, you ask some question, and you're going to be bombarded with, oh, this is not the Clojure way to do things. We use libraries, we don't use frameworks. And there's a lot of this kind of going on, and it's not malicious, right? A lot of us have learned this over the years. Like, this is a better way to do things. But not everybody who wants to come into the bubble wants to do it in the best way possible. They might have their own philosophy of life. Maybe they're building a small game, small personal hobby project. Maybe they don't want to do it the right way. Maybe they just want to get something out there. And for people like these, I think if we end up rejecting their ideas because of the way we interact with them, we end up becoming a very non-welcoming culture. And again, right, only the bold people can kind of overcome all of these. And again, that's a feedback loop, right? Only bold people can kind of break into this barrier and get into Clojure. But we want to be more open to every other kind of person, right? We have to be more vulnerable as an entire community where we kind of welcome more people. So how are we doing on some other things? Let's do. It's too much of pessimism. Let's talk some positive stuff, right? Excitement in the community. I think Clojure. Every single day, there's a new article about Clojure. People are excited. People are doing crazy shit with it. So I think our community is really excited in a lot of different areas. Diversity and culture, I think this could use some boosting, sure, but I don't think it's a huge problem. Friendliness, I think a lot of us are friendly, but like I want to kind of reference loose talk here. I think I want to be vulnerable, and I think I myself have kind of rejected ideas of people online, that this is not the right way to do things. And a lot of people have rejected mine as well. And I think as a community, we can kind of do much better than this, right? Because you post one comment online, maybe you post it on Reddit or Clojure or Clojurians, but 10,000 people are going to read it. There are so many lurkers. And they are the ones who are outside of the bubble. They are not the ones commenting, right? And if they're reading these kind of messages like, oh, just use a library. Oh, this is not how XYZ library works. Like, we need to be more welcoming and friendly and accepting of questions. We need to accept that people can have a different way to use the library. Meetups, conferences, workshops, you're at the best Heart of Clojure conference. So I think we're doing good. I think we have one more coming up in February, Reclojure. But yeah, I think meetups have kind of reduced post-COVID. And I think this has happened for a lot of different communities. I've actually pulled some stats, and almost every programming language meetups and conferences have gone down over the last couple of years because of COVID. So I don't think we need to be worried about that too much. But the more we meet, right, like Arna mentioned, the more we meet, the more we kind of have these intercultural ideas which we can kind of think about. Blogs, articles, I think we're fine. Passion projects, we are good. New generation of programmers. I think we are kind of failing to get these new generation of programmers. I'm 28 years old, and I have a lot of friends in the tech scene. And I think all of them simply reject Clojure because they don't have an easy way to do things. They don't know what to get started with and build shit. Like, we are excited, but we want to build things instantly, right? Before we understand REPL, before we understand data transformation or anything like that. So again, to kind of get the new generation of programmers, can we do the boring stuff? To do this, we need to open up as a community to the fears of outsiders, right? So unless we accept ourselves that, yes, Clojure is doing some things right, but we do not know all the answers. There may be some ideas from outside of the community, which are actually maybe, they may not gel well with the existing way of Clojure, but they can be added to our language, our pattern language. Like we can adopt some of those extra patterns and kind of build a more coherent pattern for Clojure. So to do that, I have a lot of suggestions. Lisp course, we need to solve problems, write the docs, blog about it. This one is passionate for me, which is creating a Rails or Django for Clojure. I've been working on this myself since the past couple of months. I'm trying to kind of replicate Django in Clojure. But every single time someone has tried to ask this question on Clojureans or the Reddit, like there's always like 10 comments telling people like this is not the way to do Clojure. And there's this extreme, like I'm going to be vulnerable here, there's this extreme fear of rejection that if I put this out there, people are not going to respect me as a programmer. They're going to think I do not understand Clojure. And that is what has holding me back, because Django was the reason I kind of got so much deep into programming, right? It let me build cool websites in like minutes, in weeks, in days. And I just don't have that for Clojure. And we can't ask people to learn Emacs. I think that's a no-go. Although I'm an Emacs user. Okay, to summarize, Clojure is doing just fine. I think we should chill out. Clojure is great. It's in good hands. We grew from nothing to 20, 30,000 on Clojureans. And I think we will keep doing fine, right? I don't think anyone needs to be afraid of. I was talking to Eric Normand just now before the talk, and he mentioned that although there are 20,000 JavaScript jobs and there are only 20 Clojure jobs, any single person finding a job just needs one job. So I think we can still kind of figure this out. But to do that, we don't have to start with the economics as in the business economics, but we need to start with the economics of the community, right? We need to make sure we are welcoming as a community and we are accepting and more friendly to every single person outside of this bubble. Yeah. So these are the two books which will change your life if you read them. And while you're reading them, think about Clojure, right? Every time he says town or place or building or city, just think about Clojure. And there's one more quote I want to share from Christopher Alexander. People cannot be genuinely comfortable and healthy in a house which is not theirs. And all forms of rental, whether from private landlords or public-facing agencies, work against the natural process which allows people to form stable, self-healing communities. So until we really understand this, that every single person who's coming from outside of the bubble, if they can't feel at home in the Clojure community and in the Clojure ecosystem, if their ideas are rejected, if you're not welcoming enough at a community level, it's going to be very hard to form a self-healing community, which keeps on growing. So thank you. I live in Mumbai. It's called the Sapno Ka Shahar, which means the city of dreams. And fun fact, Mumbai has more population than the entire of Belgium. So Clojure is my other city of dreams. It is my Sapno Ka Shahar. And I want all of us to put our hearts into it and open up, be more vulnerable as a community and at the individual level. And I want to start doing that by thanking some of my personal guardians of Clojure, which is Arne from Lambda Island, Bogdude, Eric Normand, Practically Johnny, Pez, of course, and the Defend podcast, because I've learned so much from them. And they allowed me to kind of cross this bubble and get into Clojure. So yeah, thank you. And this is the last slide I just added. I'm publicly going to do 30 days of openness by kind of posting something online. I'm not sure what it's going to be, because I'm extremely inspired by loose talk. And that's it. Slides are not moving forward. I think I'm done. Thank you.